Hello everyone and welcome. Make a cup of your favorite drink and get comfortable because this is a wonderful time for new stories from Yellowcat. Send your own stories in the comments below and maybe they'll be in our new video. What was your most annoying neighbor like? A pair of 80-somethings who were sister and brother. They lived in the apartment below me in a duplex home, and the landlords despaired of what they were going to do when they finally died because their place was like a cave of old people stuff. The sister cooked in their dark kitchen with lots of oil that had been spattering everywhere for years, so it seemed like there was a fine, sticky, yellowish-brown film of oil on everything, which then picked up all the dust, so basically if you had allergies, it was the last place you wanted to be invited into. No matter what it was in their place, if it didn't smell of oil, it smelled like pipe tobacco and other musty stuff. They decided I was going to be their replacement daughter, which sounded nice when the brother said he would happily take out my garbage, but then I found out that they were also going through my garbage after I went to work because they started commenting on what I was eating and drinking. Then they got wildly offended when I started taking my garbage to work with me and accused me of not trusting them. This was also somewhere around when I told them I didn't need them to make food and leave it outside my door. It wasn't that they weren't being nice, it was the way they would then make sure I told them for days how grateful I was and what a great cook she was. After we crossed that Rubicon, they started complaining about everything from how late I stayed up, they could hear me walking on the ceiling, hear water running, hear toilets flushing, to my company, too loud, they looked like a bad crowd, etc. They whispered about my private life to the neighbors, finding wine bottles in my recycling, and generally made themselves a super pain in the A. I lasted 18 months there and realized why the landlords couldn't stand them. Apparently, they did this to every normal tenant who moved into the other unit, but because of their age and because they paid their rent, etc., they couldn't be evicted. Really, worst neighbors ever. RIP, they probably died easily 20 years ago. Middle-aged guy who doesn't work. Is up at 4 and in bed by 8 and expects everyone else living around him to be in bed too. A lot of young working professionals in a condo community, so in the summertime on a Friday, Saturday, people are in the pool barbecue until 11 p.m. He would constantly lose his ass demanding people around him cut it out at 8 p.m. One night he got so mad he slammed his bedroom window so hard it shattered. F you, Fred. Go live out in the bush if you want things on your schedule. He was just an A. 20 years ago, we had joined driveways that split into our own as we lived on a cul-de-sac. I was maybe 6 or 7, and I remember me and my younger siblings getting death stares from this guy and him yelling at us for being on his side of the driveway on our bikes. When my parents decided to move, we had an open house. This guy sent his teenage daughter outside with her stereo to blast some rap music on the front driveway. I remember my dad politely asking her to at least turn it down. She started screaming at my dad and, right on cue, her dad comes flying out the house up in arms screaming that my dad was threatening his daughter. I vividly remember the guy pointing at me, age 8 at the time, and screaming, "I'm going to make sure the only time you see your dad is from behind bars where he effing belongs." Of course nothing happened, but wow. There were so many other things that happened over the years with him. He was absolutely the most angry and vindictive person I think I've ever come across in my life. It takes a pretty horrible person to threaten children like that, in my opinion. Come outside every time I do. If I mow, my neighbors will mow at the same time, sometimes a bit after I finish. If I get a delivery, they come outside and say, "Wow, working on another project?" If I have company pull up, they come outside to let their dogs go potty or check the mail. There is only 5 of us on a back road, and they are all over 60. I am 27. Although it's annoying, they are always pleasant, and I'm sure they watch my house when I'm at work and would be quick to call the authorities if something happened when I wasn't home. I'll take the annoyance over having pesky young neighbors who party any day. I lived on an Air Force base many years ago. The houses were basically duplexes with 4 houses attached. Quadplex? I was on the end, so I thought I was lucky to only have one neighbor. Wrong. The father was a screamer/yeller. He yelled at the top of his lungs about everything. His meth head wife would wander around the neighborhood and let her 5 kids roam free. As you can imagine, the children were not well behaved. They also screamed at all hours of the day and night, easily heard through cheap housing walls. They would ride their bikes in my driveway, which I would normally have no problem with, but they would crash their bikes into our cars instead of using the brakes. They smoked in their house, so the smell naturally permeated through into my house. Nothing was ever done after several complaints. When they moved, because they got orders to another state, the housing office people came in and were appalled at the damage this family had done to the house. They had to get Surf Pro out to clean up the smoke, food, and human poop that had accumulated. The housing office told me in passing that it was upwards of $30,000 in damages at least. No idea what happened to that family, but after the house was all cleaned up, a new family moved in and they were awesome. The guy in my old building who decided my parking space was his garage. His space was so full of S that his S-ing minivan always had to park right on the space line. Soon, junk started to appear between my car and the wall. One day, he started storing gross mattresses on the wall, so I chucked them outside. A few days later, they were back, moldy and bloated. The guy was the only person in the building with kids, so he wanted special privileges. He would do stuff like keep his second car in the guest space or our space that is supposed to be used to wash our cars. So glad I'm done with this building. Had an old lady living across from the back of my apartment. Really sweet, made jams and salsas for people and handed them out to tenants. Everyone thought she was great. Well, her health started to deteriorate and she ended up getting a caretaker. This caretaker was easily one of the most miserably crappy people I've ever met. Now, let me state for the record, he was not a tenant. He didn't live there. He would come for a while, help the woman out, and then leave. Might have been related, I don't know. Over the course of about 4 months, he filed about 300 complaints through the apartment management about various tenants. He complained regularly about his upstairs neighbor's toddler making too much noise. If someone parked in his self-proclaimed parking space, it was open parking. He complained that me and my roommate were drug dealers because we used our back door to get to the parking lot too much. He was a nightmare. He ended up complaining about my friend's family walking alongside the road down the street from the apartment. There was no sidewalk to walk on. They eventually had to call the police for harassment. This guy would not leave them alone. To make matters worse, he was good friends with the apartment manager, who will end up going to his own special place in H, so he would generally take all of his complaints seriously. He complained once to management that I was naked with my fiancé in the living room. That was honestly pretty funny. The manager's face when he talked to me about it, since it's not illegal and the guy should have been minding his own business in the first place. We had the blinds mostly closed, so unless you walk up to the window, you wouldn't have seen us. My friend's family moved out, our neighbors to our side moved out, we finally moved out. Never before have I wanted to slash someone else's tires so bad. Then he could have kept his parking spot. When I bought my house, my next-door neighbor introduced himself and asked if it was okay if he parked his pickup truck in front of my house for a few hours. I said of course. For the next 5 years, he parked in front of my yard and often on my sprinkler head. He was never home at a reasonable time, so I could never get a hold of him. I had to put a sign on the sprinkler to get him to park off the grass, but he didn't stop parking in front of my lawn until he moved out earlier this year. New neighbors couldn't be more awesome. I used to have a neighbor that would constantly find things about our property to be at. His property that was adjacent to ours was entirely forested, and we were pretty much open field with a few bushes. He wanted to put up a 10-foot tall fence, and he wanted us to pay for it because who the H knows? This is coming from the guy that refuses to trim his trees or cut them down, so naturally at least one will fall on our power line during snow season and will be without power for a week. Meanwhile, he's nice and cozy because he is on a different line. My favorite instance was when he lawyered up and threatened to have our power cut off because our electric box, which was built before we moved in, mind you, was, by our measurements, 3 feet onto his property. He had over a dozen acres, but cared so desperately about the 3 feet. We spent months fighting it, essentially saying it was the builder's fault, not ours, and that he could move it if he wanted, so long as he paid for it. He still fights my parents about it, and it's been over a year now. Like, calm the F down. I lived in a bad neighborhood in North Philly. The woman who would have fights with her sister's husband. She did these by standing on a sidewalk and screaming at any hour, "Girl, you best be getting my phone. You best be getting my mother effing phone. You hear me? I know you hear me. Get me my mother effing phone." Had a very old lady who was very religious and would constantly put up flyers for one of those scam churches in your mailbox, under your windshield wiper, and once in the gas cap cover. The racist Jackie who decided to move into a 10% white area and go around calling our nice neighbors slurs because he didn't have the balls to say it to the bangers. People in the house connected decided to play rap so loud it was actually vibrating picture frames off the wall during a party. My mother took our really good speakers. These were $8,000 concert level speakers when they came out, but we got them in a trash from an eviction, put them up to the wall, and put a Josh Groban Christmas album on repeat, and then we all left for the day. My father is a jobless hoarder with a Trump Pence sign in his window who uses a few dozen tires to hold his parking space, so I'm sure he doesn't make the best impression. Now, my most annoying neighbor is an old homophobic hag who doesn't like that I brought a gay friend and his boyfriend to a community bonfire years ago, so now she's constantly trying to get me in trouble for running an eBay business out of the house I'm renting because it increases the traffic. What traffic, you old F? The mailman comes either way? My roommate currently has a restraining order against her because, in her attempt to collect evidence, she broke the wire mesh under the deck trying to look into our basement and had several trail cams put in the forest around the house we rent. A friend shot down 3 of them by using them as target practice for a crossbow, but later we found out she had 6 on my property. I only found the 3, and 3 more on the state property. I was at my family home when all this went down and stayed away, but needless to say, the restraining order was granted. I haven't heard anything of her in a while, but she's constantly posting stuff about us on Facebook. I think she thinks me and my roommate are dating. Thank you for watching. Guys, thank you for all the support and the likes. Subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed yet. See you next time.